What kind of person was Barnabas? Barnabas is a key figure in early Christianity appearing in the book of Acts in the Bible. He is a man of comfort who possessed a character that encouraged and built up others. His main characteristics and deeds are as follows. His real name was Joseph, but the apostles, witnessing his outstanding ability to comfort and exhort, gave him the nickname Barnabas, meaning, son of comfort. His background was that of a Levite from Cyprus, present-day Cyprus, and he was a devoted individual who even sold his own field to make an offering for the early Jerusalem church community. He was also Paul's helper. He personally took Paul, who was doubted by the disciples even after his conversion, and introduced him to the apostles. Later, he served alongside Paul at the church in Antioch and played a decisive role in Paul establishing himself as an apostle. The Bible describes him as a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith. He was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. Acts chapter 11 verse 24. Barnabas accompanied Paul on the first missionary journey, laying the foundation for Gentile missions, and demonstrated inclusiveness by giving a second chance even to a failed young man like John Mark. In modern churches, the role of helping new believers adapt to the community is sometimes referred to as the Barnabas ministry. The reason Barnabas and Paul parted ways. The decisive reason for their separation was a difference in opinion regarding whether to take John Mark along on the second missionary journey. The specific trigger for the separation. The incident began during the first missionary journey, when John Mark abandoned his ministry midway in Persia in the Pamphylia region and returned to Jerusalem. While the Bible does not reveal the exact reason for his return, Paul considered it an irresponsible act. There was a fierce argument. While preparing for the second missionary journey, Barnabas suggested taking Mark back and giving him another chance, but Paul strongly opposed taking someone who had failed once. Consequently, they parted ways. This disagreement was so intense that they quarreled fiercely and separated. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus. Acts chapter 15 verse 39. Consequently, Barnabas left for Cyprus with Mark, while Paul set out on a missionary journey by a different route with Silas. The relationship with John Mark is kinship. Barnabas and John Mark are cousins. My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. You have received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him. Colossians chapter 4 verse 10. It appears that Barnabas's generosity toward Mark was driven by this familial background, as well as his natural disposition of building people up. John Mark underwent a process of growth and restoration. Thanks to Barnabas's encouragement and education, John Mark later grew into an outstanding minister. He became the author of the Gospel of Mark, one of the four Gospels. He reconciled with Paul. Over time, Paul also came to acknowledge Mark. Their relationship was fully restored to the extent that in 2 Timothy, written in the latter part of his life, Paul referred to Mark as useful to him in his work and requested that he be brought in. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 11. Consequently, while the separation of Barnabas and Paul was an unfortunate event, it served as an opportunity for the evangelism team to split into two, enabling the wider spread of the gospel, and provided a stepping stone for Mark to make a comeback. Subsequently, we will examine Paul's specific assessment of John Mark and the characteristics of the Gospel of Mark written by Mark. The main characteristics of Paul's changed evaluation of John Mark, who was revived by Barnabas's acceptance, and the Gospel of Mark he wrote are as follows. Paul's changed evaluation is that Mark is a useful person in his work. Paul, who had initially criticized Mark as irresponsible and even parted ways with Barnabas, later came to recognize Mark as a valuable co-worker. In Colossians, written from prison, Paul mentions Mark and exhorts them to welcome him if he comes. Mark became a beneficial helper to Paul. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 11, written just before his martyrdom, Paul explicitly stated, "Bring Mark, for he is useful to me in my work, highly valuing him as an indispensable presence in his ministry. He became a source of comfort. Paul also demonstrated his deep trust in Mark in Philemon chapter 1 verse 24, calling him his co-worker. And so do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas and Luke, my fellow workers. Philemon chapter 1 verse 24. The main characteristics of the Gospel of Mark are as follows. Mark served as an interpreter and assistant to the Apostle Peter, and is known to have written the first Gospel based on Peter's testimony. It is the first Gospel. It was written first among the four Gospels, is estimated to have been written between the 60s and 70s AD, and served as foundational material for the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. It is an action-oriented narrative. Rather than focusing on Jesus' long sermons, it centers on his dynamic actions, such as miracles and healings. The frequent use of the word immediately makes the narrative very fast-paced and exciting. It is a gospel intended for Gentiles and Romans. The abundance of explanations regarding Jewish customs and the Aramaic language indicates that the primary audience was assumed to be Gentile believers in the Roman region who lacked a Jewish background. It preached Jesus as a suffering servant. It emphasizes Jesus not as a glorious king, but as a servant who suffers and serves to atone for the sins of humanity. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark chapter 10 verse 45. Without Barnabas's patience and encouragement, the Gospel of Mark that we read today might not exist.